Hi, I'm Monica Olson.
And I'm Jennifer Walsh.
And you're listening to the Biophilic Solutions Podcast, where every other week we sit down with experts and thought leaders in order to explore the innate connection between humans and nature and why we need nature to thrive.
We truly believe that reconnecting with the natural world and understanding our place within nature is a key to tackling the global environmental problems we face today.
So let's get to today's episode. Hey, Jennifer.
Hey, Monica.
So to kick us off today, I have a question for you. I know you walk outside all the time, but have you ever been on a trail or in a forest and considered the age of the forest that you're in?
Okay, before this interview today, I hadn't really. I'd always kind of thought of forests as forests without consciously differentiating them in my mind. But our guest today, Joan Maloof, really taught me a lot about old growth forests and why it's so important to preserve them.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat. I mean, I think any forest is better than no forest, but older, untouched forests offer so much more in the way of carbon sequestration and biodiversity, as well, of course, beauty and awe.
Absolutely. So today we're speaking with Joan Maloof, who is Professor Emeritus of Biology at Salisbury University and the founder of the Old Growth Forest Network. The Old Growth Forest Network is the only national network of protected old growth native forest in the entire United States. Their goal is to locate and designate at least one protected forest in every county that has the right climate to sustain a forested area.
So in this conversation with Joan, we talk about her journey to founding the Old Growth Forest Network, the intricate and rich ecosystems that old forests support, and beauty as a catalyst for positive change.
Absolutely. And I so love this conversation. So let's get to our interview with Joan Maloof. Well, hi, Joan. We're so thrilled to have you on the podcast today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, Jennifer. Thanks for inviting me.
Oh, yeah, we're so excited. So, Joan, besides all the wonderful intro we gave a minute ago, we would love to know, as we do for many of our guests, where did your passion for nature come from and how did you turn it into a career? Because it's pretty exciting.
Thanks, Monica. Well, I've thought about this myself. Where did it start? And honestly, I think it started when I was born. I think I came into the world with it. You know, I remember some of my earliest memories, crawling on our suburban lawn and looking at the difference between the grass stems and the clover leaves. So already I was fascinated by plants, but I never had any mentors. So many people assume that, I had a grandmother or someone in my family taught me all about the plants, but no one taught me about them. And in fact, it wasn't until I started college that I realized you could actually major in plant science. I was so excited when I learned that. It's like, wow, you can major in plants? Of course, I did that. I majored in plants. And my first career, you asked about my turning my love of nature into a career. I've actually had 3 different careers with the plants. And the first career after my undergraduate degree was in landscaping and horticulture, landscape design. And I ended up being the horticulturalist for a university campus. But I'm one of those lifelong learners, and I just always wanted to keep going. So then I got my master's and studied the native plants, and then I got my PhD studying plant-animal interactions and learning all the native plants. I'd already learned all the landscaping plants, and now I was learning all the plants in the wild and just appreciating them. And what happened really after my PhD, where I was teaching at the university and I was teaching plant identification and ecology and biology and also doing research as PhDs do. And I was looking around for a good study site because I'm most fascinated by pure nature, if you will, like nature unaffected by humans. Like, what does it do without us? Here is a place where I can study that. And I realized that the forests were the most natural near where I lived, Maryland. But then I'd find an older forest, and the next thing I knew, it was being cut down. and it was being replaced by one of these younger pine plantation forests. And that's when I really began my advocacy part of my career. Like I wanted to do something to save these old forests. So I started writing essays, and eventually those essays turned into my first book called Teaching the Trees. And I had always been curious about these older forests that had never been cut. Like, are there any? Where are they? You know, I've been to California and I'd seen them, but on the East Coast, are there any left? And it seems like I could never get an answer to that. And so for this book, Teaching the Trees, I dug a little harder and I learned that there was a forest about 60 miles away from me that had never been cut. So that's what an old growth forest is, just developed on its own, never been cut, and it's escaped the tornadoes and it's escaped the fires. So it's growing the way it's been growing for thousands of years. So I went to this forest and I stepped out of my car and I just breathed in the air, and it was so magical in a way, not only just to be under these big trees, but something in the air made me feel joyous. And I wrote about that from my book. The chapter was called Old Growth Air. And that chapter was really the beginning of the whole forest bathing movement in the US. That was back in 2006. So the Japanese had been doing the forest bathing, Shinrin-yoku, but it really hadn't caught on in the States yet until that chapter was reprinted some places. And then just to wrap this up, so the question that I kept getting after that book came out was, where's that forest? Everybody wanted to go to that forest. They all wanted to see an old growth forest. And that's when I realized, oh, I need to write another book that lets people know exactly where these places are in the East. And that book's called Among the Ancients, Adventures in the Eastern Old Growth Forests. So I went to one old growth forest in each of the 26 Eastern states, talked about what I found, exactly how to get there. And it was on those journeys that I realized that these forests are so rare. There's only 1% left. And they're so special and we need to preserve them. It's like, who is preserving them? And I realized that there was no organization of people that were specifically looking to save these older forests. That was 2007. I was just like, I have to form this organization. And not only will we save what's left, but we will make sure that some of the second growth forests are allowed to develop and won't be cut again. And that idea became the Old Growth Forest Network.
Okay, well, you're leading in perfectly.
Joan, like when I heard about your work and I started reading your work, as much time as Monica and I talk about forests and how much I've loved growing around forests, and I never thought about old growth and what that meant to the planet. I always thought about forests as forests. So, and it was interesting because I never thought about studying like what it means to be an old growth forest or how old is an old growth forest. So it sparked so much interest in me because I just thought it was fascinating. I never, as someone who I think of myself as someone who understands trees or plants or plant species and the length of a time it takes to grow your work opened my eyes to a space I wasn't even thinking about. So I'm just to say I appreciate that right off the bat.
Fabulous. Yeah, I had the same. When I was a teenager, I remember thinking about the forests around where I lived, like, are these original forests? How old are these forests? Are there any original ones left? And I would ask people and I would get all kinds of different answers. Some people would say, oh, there's nothing left. They've all been cut down. And other people would say, oh, yeah, sure, there's lots of it. And I would think, but where are they? So, yeah, finally, we're beginning to understand now. Now I can walk into a forest and tell you whether it's an old growth forest or a second growth forest or a younger forest.
So tell us about the Old Growth Forest Network that you created. You started this, what you were saying, in 2007, right?
Well, in 2007, the idea came to me. It was when I was traveling to visit these few remaining old growth forests in the East to write about them. One day, all of a sudden, it just came to me. It's like, wow, I'm driving hundreds of miles to get to the next little patch of old growth sometimes. And these are so precious. As I said, we need to protect them. And we also need to let some other forests grow back to become old growth. I consider them future old growth forests. And I started thinking, wouldn't it be great if there was one forest in every county of the U.S. that can support forest growth? That forest would not be cut again, and it would be open to the public. So anybody could go and visit it. They could watch this forest develop over the eons, their lifetime. It wouldn't be like the lots in our backyard that get cut down.
Yeah.
But this is a forest that's protected and we can visit. And if there were one in each county, then no child would be too far from one of these forests. We would all understand what they look like. We could then, with that understanding, want to advocate for them. So that idea became the Old Growth Forest Network. So our vision is one forest in each county, protected from logging, open to the public, and relatively accessible.
I love it. Yeah. I believe that the network says that there's over 3,000 counties in the U.S. Is that correct?
Yes.
And so I wasn't sure, where are you in that process and what are the struggles or barriers to get there?
We'll be right back after a quick break. Jennifer, guess what's coming up and where we get to hang out?
What's that, Monica?
The Biophilic Leadership Summit. It's back this March 24th through 26th.
Oh my gosh, I cannot wait to see you in person again. It's been way too long.
I know, me too. And we invite all our listeners to come to this year's summit. We're going to be exploring biophilic placemaking and how we use biophilic principles to promote health, happiness, and vitality in public spaces.
Yes, and I was just reading over the schedule, which I'm very excited about. There are so many great speakers and panels. And when you get to join us, I'll be doing a nature walk and moderating a wonderful panel on activating community spaces with two incredible women, an architect and an urban planner.
So this summit is put on by the Biophilic Institute and Biophilic Cities Project. So you can also come meet all of the leading experts in biophilia. And in addition to all incredible multiple presentations, we're going to have all sorts of great farm-to-table meals, plus cocktails, some book signings, and lots of networking, which is always a favorite. And it's going to be at your and my favorite place, the Inn at Serenbe.
Yep, that's one of my favorite places, as you know. So join us in Serenbe for the 6th Annual Biophilic Leadership Summit from March 24th to March 26, 2024.
And you can learn more about the summit and register today at biophilic.summit.com.
That's biophilic.summit.com. We hope to see you there.
We'll see you soon. Bye, Jen.
Bye.
Yes. So over 3,000 counties in the U.S., but not all of them can support forest growth. Some are prairie, some are desert. So we're estimating about 2,400. So about 2/3 of the country can support forest growth.
Great. Okay.
By the way, we're very lucky that we have such a forested nation. Not all nations have the beautiful forests we have. So that's really our goal. And right now we are close to 250 forests in the network in 35 different states. And that includes Hawaii and Alaska and all over the place. And the barriers are often there'll be a perfect forest for the network, seemingly. Like in Maryland, there was this forest and it was the one I went to for my book. It was an old growth forest. It had a trail. It had a parking area. It was part of a park. It was just perfect, but not legally protected from logging because Maryland state parks are not protected from logging. So they're not generous, but they can be. And in fact, people don't realize that
No,
most state parks are not protected from logging.
that's shocking.
Oh,
And
I didn't know that either.
draw attention to these things. Oh, did you know this is not protected? And then in that case, I really, really wanted to get that forest in the network. You can imagine.
Yeah.
sure.
Child forest. So I had to work at getting a bill passed that said any old growth forest on state land could not be cut. So then it was protected. That's incredible. And then it could be added
Oh
to the
my
network.
gosh.
Yeah.
Wow.
That is incredible.
Yeah. In other cases, too, there might be a community forest or even the Nature Conservancy forests, although they don't usually cut them, they don't have a protective layer per se. So we'll ask them to sign a memorandum of agreement that that forest will be protected. So we've been able to help with protection of a lot of forests, too.
That's incredible.
That is really incredible. Also, is it true? Did I read in one of your, somewhere you wrote that old growth forests tend to store more carbon than new forests? Is that true?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. The older a forest gets, the more carbon it's going to store. And that's because the trees get larger, of course. And so there's more, all that wood you see in the trunk, 50% of that is carbon. So the trunk, the branches, the leaves, but also the roots underground. And not just the roots, but the whole underground ecosystem that's created. All of that is carbon. So one way that we could draw down the carbon in the atmosphere is by letting our forests get older and bigger and to hold more carbon.
Yeah, that makes so much sense.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about the structure. I feel like we, and maybe the general public, have started to learn and understand the interconnectivity of trees beneath our feet. There's been a lot of research done, but then also some maybe more palatable consumer publications, not research that have really started to explain what's going on. So can you talk about the structure of an old growth forest, how kind of it works, and why it's so important to your point about the carbon from an ecological perspective?
First of all, imagine a piece of land, soil, dirt, and it's kind of magical in a way that these big plants, these huge plants just grow right up from that soil. Nobody's planted them in these native forests. Nobody's watering them. Nobody's weeding them or fertilizing them. This is what our planet does when it's left alone, right? It creates these big plants that are taller than us and they live longer than us. But in the process of those big plants we call trees growing, they create an ecosystem themselves because they're creating shade and moisture, and their roots underground are connected to the fungi, the mycorrhizal network. And then you'll have branches that'll eventually fall off as these trees get older and create cavities. And then birds can nest in the cavities, or mammals like flying squirrels can nest in there. And the ecosystem just continues to develop, all because we had these trees originally. And then some of the trees reach the end of their lives and they fall over. And then they have another whole ecosystem job to do. The moss grows on them and the beetles eat the wood, and then the lizards come and eat the beetles. And it just goes on and on and on. The complexity is just amazing. So in my newest book, Nature's Temples, what I did was I studied all these different layers, whether you're talking about salamanders or snails or mosses or fungi. And I looked at the research literature, and if any scientist had compared a younger forest to one of these older forests, what did they find? And in every case, this complexity that comes with age ended up with more of whatever they were studying, right? More wildflowers, more snails, more ground beetles. And that really is the other part of the old growth forest, besides the trees, all the things that the trees allow to live there.
I love that all that comes with aging is so much beauty.
Yes.
All this profound beauty and this other, as we continue to evolve in our different forms. Oh, I love that. I'm so glad you brought that up, Monica, to ask you, Joan, because that leads you to a question of, because I know your answer, but you know how many people will say, oh, but the forest needs to be managed. Like, how can we have, old growth forests? They have to be managed. I would love your thoughts about that.
Well, that's exactly why I wrote Nature's Temples, because I was so frustrated. I kept hearing these people say, forests need to be managed to be healthy. That line, I'd say, really? It might sound good. And then it makes people nervous if they own a forest. They think, oh, I should be doing something to my forest. So that's where I decided to do this research and to tease it apart and say, really, to me, not just to me, but to the scientists, the healthiest forest is one that's not managed. And if you look at where we have our oldest trees and our biggest trees and our most biodiversity, these are in the unmanaged old growth forest. So the forest knows what it's doing. Just have to leave it alone and let it do it.
Right. Can you give us a couple examples? Like, I'm thinking of having grown up in California, like Muir Woods. Is that an example of an old growth forest?
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Okay.
It is an old growth forest, a beautiful old growth forest. But I selected another forest for that county just because there's so many people that go to Muir Woods. There's the big parking area and there's the asphalt walkway. So I thought, well, if I really want to give people the experience of being in an old growth forest without being distracted by the crowds, then there's another one for that county. And by the way, these forests that we're talking about, if anyone wants to know where they are or how to get to them, our website lists them all. The website is oldgrowthforest.net. And There's a little button there for forests. And then you can look at whatever state you're interested in. So you go to California.
Oh, that's great.
One's in California. Now, in the East, some of our classic old growth forests are Cook Forest in Pennsylvania.
Okay.
That's one of the better known ones. In the Adirondacks, there's a lot of old growth forests and a lot of beautiful ones scattered all throughout.
Yeah, I think Maine heading up to Canada, maybe.
Yes. And Maine has been a challenge. We just added our first Maine forest, which is hard to believe because the state is so forested, but it's almost all in logging rotation. So there's hard old growth there, and the old growth that is there is not very accessible. So we're looking for places that grandparents can bring grandchildren.
I see. Yeah.
Wilderness areas. Yeah. Just added the first Maine forest. And how we do this, the structure of the network, because as you can imagine, thousands of counties and we can't be everywhere. We're a small organization. So we have people that volunteer to look around their county, and we call them county.
Okay.
So we might get them started. We might say, oh, we have these nominations. Anybody can nominate a forest too. We have these nominations and, maybe go talk to this person, maybe that person, state foresters, the nonprofits. And what a fun job, right? They get to look all around their county, and then they help us choose the forest that's the oldest and open to the public. And then we make sure that it's protected from logging. And once all those pieces come together, then we have an induction celebration or ceremony where the forest owners, and it could be, anything from federal, state, county, nonprofit, land trust, come, and we come, and people that are on our mailing list are invited for each of these state events. And then we talk about the forest, hand over the plaque, and then hike through the woods. So
that's great.
Really fun.
Yeah. And I noticed you have multiple designations, right? So you've got network forests, which is, I think, what we've been talking about. But I thought that was interesting. There's sort of some subsets that if you don't quite make the network, because I think that was interesting. You're saying, sort of with Maine, they need to be open to the public and really accessible, right? It can't be some
Yeah.
super crazy off the beaten path. But then you also do community forests and private forests. Tell us just a little bit about that, because I think as people are listening, because I think one of the things we may want to do is encourage people to think about becoming a coordinator maybe, or volunteering and nominating some forests. But there's also community and private, if you can tell us what those are.
Yeah. First, if anybody wants to volunteer, on that same website, oldgrowthforest.net, there's a link that says get involved. And that shows where you can nominate a forest, or you can just put your mailing address in there. And then, we don't hound anybody. We only send 4 emails a year unless we're inviting you to one of these forest induction celebrations, or I'm giving a talk. But as we would choose the best forest for each county, we would see, there's these other smaller forests that might be near the town that people love. These ones where maybe they're not old growth, but we want to encourage every community to have a forest. We think kids should be able to get on their bicycle and ride to a forest. And so then we added that other category of community forest. Many communities in a county, so it would be great to have many community forests. We're encouraging that. And then for the private forests, there are private forest owners that do log their forests by choice, or maybe they have to. But then there are other private forest owners that have made the decision that they're not going to log their forests. They're going to let them continue to get older, but they don't want to make them open to the public. We understand that. But we wanted to honor the commitment that those people had made, and also to let the next generation know the commitment that was made before them in their family. So maybe the parents have decided to protect the forest, and we put it in the private forest network. And then later on, perhaps those parents pass, and the kids might say, well, Mom and Dad wanted this forest to be protected, so let's honor that. So have the private forest network.
Well, and I love that somewhere in the materials it says the community forest, like that you really want the community forest to be your favorite neighborhood coffee shop or your go-to pair of hiking boots, familiar, beloved, and always within an arm's reach.
Yes.
I love that. I know. We need that. We need
definitely
to know where we can go.
Exactly. And we need to do it now. Like even my little community, I live in a town of 4,000 people, and really no forest got protected here that's on town land. And it's a shame. So we then have to look out further and further to then where kids be driven somewhere if they want to go to a forest hike. But we need to be proactive and look at the forests that are left and make.
No, definitely. One of the things that you sort of touched on a couple times now is managed forest or logging. And, I'm in a very rural area, and sometimes the individuals are very land rich, but they can't pay their taxes. And so they do some culling in order to sell the timber, which is, it's a hard thing to argue when somebody, in order to continue owning their land. But talk a little bit about harvesting trees, like maybe we talk about it in that vocabulary. I know you really know, like we're not only sacrificing biodiversity, we're sacrificing beauty. Can you share a little bit about the role of beauty that plays into these forests? Because I think that's really important, and something that Jen and I talk about a lot is the beauty of nature is so important.
So as I shared, I'm a scientist. And as I was going to visit all these old growth forests in the East, I thought, well, what's the scientific method? If you learned about that in school, number one was like observation. So I thought, I'm going to be observing all these forests. I might come up with a new theory, or a hypothesis, something to study. And I would go to the forests and I would spend time in the forest. And then afterwards, I would think, well, what did I see? What did I experience? And I would go, well, it was just so beautiful.
Yeah.
After time, it was just like, it was just so beautiful. And that's what I came up with. So then I thought, well, I should just study that. So I actually did a little study called Measuring the Beauty of the Forest, where I had hundreds of undergraduate students, and I had them go into different age forests and ranked the forests on how beautiful they thought they were. And the older forest was judged as being more beautiful. But
wow,
with an old growth forest because there was none close enough to campus that I could hook up to.
I love that you did that. I think that's amazing.
Medium.
Amazing.
So,
yeah.
And that beauty is so important because it's what is going to open our hearts to want to then save the forests.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
We need that.
Beauty is that initial kind of spark that we all have within us to want to know something more, learn something more, and protect that thing that we love and we find beautiful. And
we just are so, obviously the name of the podcast is Biophilic Solutions, but with just biophilia, we so believe in that hypothesis that we need nature in order to thrive. And a huge part of that is the beauty of it and the awe that it brings to us.
Exactly right. And there's other benefits from the forest too, like the health benefits from just walking through the forest and breathing that air. Our blood pressure goes down, our immune system gets more active. It's very calming to our hormones. So maybe part of that beauty experience too is just feeling good within our bodies at the same time. And just learning about this, there's so much we don't know about the forest.
Yeah, no, I think it's really interesting. We have a good friend, Dr. Anjan Chatterley, who is at, right? Is he at UPenn, Jen?
He's at UPenn, Center for Neuroaesthetics.
And yeah, neuroaesthetics. And he does a ton of research on how the beauty affects the brain. And he just wrote a paper that I read that was phenomenal, stating or hypothesizing himself that are we at the beginning of a new renaissance, a new romanticism?
Yeah.
Where with the epidemic of loneliness and AI and these screens that we're on right now, which have a ton of benefits, but obviously a ton of negatives, maybe we're waking up. Maybe the scientists and the artists and everybody's coming together and starting to wake up, and the ecologists. And I just found it such a hopeful paper. We should have him back on, Jen, to talk specifically about that paper, because I think it's exactly what you're doing, Joan. It's in even this new book that I really want to touch on before we sort of wrap up is Nature's Temples. Just the name. Can you tell us a little bit about it? You've revised and expanded it. Can you talk a little bit about it and what's the reaction that you're getting right now?
Yes. So I really wrote that for the people working to save forests, like you and I, and they don't always have all the scientific information right at their fingertips to show how special these places are. So I wanted to take that scientific information and put it into a format that's easily readable and easily understandable to let anyone understand the biodiversity of these places and even the benefits to the humans. So Nature's Temples, a natural history of old growth forests. And the beauty, I started thinking about it and I thought, we don't really protect beauty. You could have the most beautiful place on the planet and there's nothing to stop it from being destroyed. We'll protect rare species or, other things are protected, but not beauty. So we may be waking up. And also all these health benefits from the forest, all the things that I cited that it does, like lowering blood pressure. We still don't understand exactly how that happens. Is it something in the air you breathe? Is it something about the movement? Is it the colors coming through our eyes? Or is it this experience of beauty that's healing us from the outside?
That multi-sensory, I always like to say we are multi-sensory, or we are sensorial beings looking for sensorial experiences. And the forests are that kind of like church-like experience that we're just in and out of the beauty.
We haven't even addressed the sound.
Yeah. Sound is so important. Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
We hope the Old Growth Forest Network will help connect people to these beautiful forests that they can visit anytime, accessible, open to the public. As I said, there's close to 250 of them now. So there's one near you.
I love it. I love it. Well, we're going to put all of this in the show notes, encourage people to nominate a forest and become a coordinator. Is there anything that we haven't touched on that you want to share before we wrap up?
You did mention about people that need to harvest, and we've come to recognize a lot of things that can be done to change these patterns. One thing that can happen there, I think we need to change our taxing system so that people that do want to just protect their forest and keep it intact can have lower property tax rates, because they're providing benefits for all of us as far as clean air and clean water and animal habitat. So they should be rewarded for that with lower tax rates. That's one.
I think that's a great point. And I know that the conservation, a lot of the land conservations work on some of that. And I hadn't thought about it for old growth forests. I'm very familiar with it for agriculture.
Right.
But that is a great point and definitely something we should dig into further. Yeah, because you're right. They are providing benefits to humanity by keeping their old growth intact.
Exactly. And I also wanted to say that it's a very interesting time on the federal level in the United States right now, because the Biden administration has started in 2022 and said, we want to find out where all the old growth forests are that are left on federal land. So this is Forest Service land and BLM land. And they completed that survey in 2023. And now just this year have said that they're going to amend all forest plans, that any old growth forest on federal lands cannot be cut down.
That's incredible.
I know, we are very excited about this. And of course, right now they're getting pushback with other governors who say, oh, we don't want that to happen. I don't know why anybody wouldn't want that to happen, but
I know
there's a lot of them, unfortunately.
But it's education. Yeah. It's education. And your book is doing that. And that's a huge part of it. We need third-party resources that are neutral, right? Because people can get political and say, oh, I don't want to support it because of one side or the other. And it's like, let's look at this from a neutral perspective, from the perspective of science and what's going to benefit all of us, humanity.
Yep. And we're excited that, the federal government is even addressing this. And
absolutely. Absolutely.
And wanting to protect it. And that's part of our work too, is helping to make that happen.
I love it.
Joan, thank you so much.
This was incredible. It was so lovely to get to connect with you and meet you. And the books are wonderful. We're going to put everything in the show notes, and everybody needs to go look at the Old Growth Forest Network. We're so excited. And you're now part of our Biophilic movement. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Joan.
Thank you. That conversation was very fascinating. We touched on so many things that are cornerstones of biophilia: beauty, awe, wellness. But I really wasn't expecting that from an old growth forest conversation. So I really enjoyed it.
I'm right there with you. It won't surprise anyone that my ears totally perked up when we started talking about beauty. Joan is someone whose background is very steeped in the hard sciences. I mean, she has a PhD in plant biology. So to hear her talking about the importance of beauty and awe and fascination felt so very validating to me.
100%. And just the way she talks about being in nature as this multisensorial experience where you take everything together, the cleaner air, the beauty, the sounds, the smells, these are the things that make nature so healing.
Yes. I also love talking about the ecosystems in these old forests. Joan laid it out so well. And I have to say, I was really blown away by the intricacy of all the ways old growth forests support plants and animals. I had no idea.
Yeah, I know. It's kind of incredible. I mean, the branches support the birds. The root network connects to the fungi network. And then these trees die and fall over. And now we've created an entirely new ecosystem for critters to live in and thrive. Goes on and on and on.
Yes, it's really pretty profound and pretty beautiful. So we definitely want you to head over to our show notes, buy one of Joan's many amazing books, and support the Old Growth Forest Network.
And find your old growth forest near you.
Absolutely.
All right, Jen. See you later.
Bye, Monica.
Thanks so much for listening. If you've enjoyed the podcast, we would love for you to follow us on our favorite listening app. Give us a 5-star rating and please leave us a review.
Listens, follows, and reviews really go such a long way and help us share these amazing interviews and solutions for a wider network.
Absolutely. And we'll be back with another great guest in a few weeks.